On behalf of the Council on Library and Information Resources and the Digital Library Federation, welcome to today's eResearch Peer Network and Mentoring Group webinar. My name is Rita Van Dynen, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. You'll notice that the chat window is on the left side of the screen. Feel free to use that for your comments or any questions at any time throughout today's webinar. We will be pausing throughout the session for questions and discussion. Today's webinar is scheduled to conclude at 2:30 p.m. If at any time you have technical difficulties, please send either Louisa or I a private chat so that we can troubleshoot with you. And to do so, you just mouse over one of our names and click on the private chat option. You can also send Louisa an email, and I am going to put in her email address in the chat window right now. Okay, and also you can exit and re-enter the webinar at any time. So joining us today, Chuck Humphrey is not joining us today apparently, he's on vacation. So we do have with us Nancy McGovern from MIT Libraries. Nancy serves as the Head of Curation and Preservation Services at the MIT Libraries. Nancy is having quite a bit of audio difficulty, so we're hoping to get that resolved before she has to present her session. Also with us today are our 4 postdoctoral fellows in data curation for the sciences and social sciences. Kendall Rourke is with us, and she's from the University of Alberta. We also have Ina Cooper from Indiana University, Vesela Ensberg from UCLA, and Natsuko Nichols from the University of Michigan. Today's webinar will cover the following. First, Kendall will summarize the results of the group activity in which you evaluated each other's research data management resources. Next, Vesela and Ina will be discussing repositories. Following this discussion, Nancy will be speaking on digital repositories and assessment tools for that, assuming that her audio is working. We're working hard to get that fixed while you all are listening to the first part of the presentation. And then we'll close today's webinar with some housekeeping items and details, including details on our next webinar. In our worst case scenario, if Nancy's not able to participate today, we will get her to separately record her session, and then we can post that link. And I do apologize for the difficulties we're having. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kendall Rourke, and she's going to talk to you about the group activity in which you all participated. So Kendall, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Rita. Is my mic okay? Yeah. So for the exercise that you all participated in, I have created a Google document that contains summaries for all the institutions. And I've just organized that along this milestones, the roadmap, as a way to organize that material. So it would be great if I'll provide the link in a second. We can send that out on Clear Connect if people want to take a look at that, and if you want to correct or add any information that wasn't covered for today. So one of the things we like to look at is just, is this a useful exercise, and how can we build on this, as part of the group. So this is just for a refresher, the milestones that we talked about in the first webinar, the policy formation, education outreach, etc. And if I could go, I guess I can go to the next slide. So here's a summary table of the evaluations. And one thing that we noticed looking at the responses, the reviews, is that we weren't able, many of the institutions weren't able to determine if an environmental scan or needs assessment had been done. That may not have been reflected in the mostly web materials that were provided. So it might be good to know if to share that information with the group. If you can take a look at the Google Doc and let us know if you've included any type of environmental scan or needs assessment in the past. And the same goes for policy formation. So there was indication that some institutions had worked on policies that were directly linked to research data management, but it was that people were unsure. But we did have for tools and infrastructure and education outreach that all institutions had begun to develop these types of services. Can folks still hear me, Rita? I just saw a note from the okay. So I'll go ahead, and then there was also unknown in terms of data service evaluation. So if you do get a chance, if you could visit the Google Doc, I'll make sure after the webinar to enable editing if you'd like to include additional information about these activities if they're listed as unknown. So from this, it looks like most of you are engaged in education and outreach and tools and infrastructure, and that many of you have some type of policy formation and then unknown in terms of these three other elements. And that's reflected also in the evaluation summary, so the institutions who offered suggestions for next steps. So I've included, this material is also in the Google document. So I won't go into those here. But for the most part, the next steps tended to focus again on education and outreach. Also environmental scan and needs assessment, if not already conducted, and tools and infrastructure. And there was a less of an emphasis on policy formation and data service evaluation. Okay. So when we're looking at a comparison of these, what was that?
This is Rita. I just want to interrupt you for a second. I can hear some conversation going on in the background, so if you have your microphone on and you're not using it, please mute it. Okay, go ahead, Kendall. My apologies.
Okay, so if we're looking at what's been done or what was included in your materials that you provided to the group, versus what is suggested for the future, that this is future developments or next steps. So we're looking at this slide is what is suggested for the future. Education outreach, tools, needs assessment, environmental scans, and versus what has been done, so education outreach, tools and infrastructure and policy. So I think that there's this question of evaluation, and is this something that is of interest to the group? Is it something that's already been done? There's a big question mark there. So most of or do we want to go forward in terms of looking at next steps in terms of education and outreach, tools and infrastructure? So I can leave that, if you have questions or suggestions, or if we want to just go ahead and maybe use the Google Doc to fill in some of the unknowns and idea scale in terms of future direction for additional webinars. So Rita, I can we can go ahead and if people have questions or response, they can go ahead and do that now, or we can leave that discussion for Clear Connect and maybe using the Google Doc to sort of fill in some of the unknowns from the assignment.
Any comments or questions about what Kendall's just presented? Feel free to use the chat window or your microphone if you like, and we'll spend a couple minutes on that before we proceed. Looks like Peter and Ina are typing in the chat window. So Peter comments that a future session on evaluation would be helpful. And Ina writes that we presented the roadmap as a set of interconnected milestones. Is there a sense of sequence at any of the institutions? If your mic's working, feel free to use it if you'd like to, or you can use the chat window. We'll spend another minute or two on this, and then we'll proceed.
I just had to go ahead and use the mic because I'm too lazy to type anymore. This is Peter at Colgate. And just in response to the, is there a sense of sequence? In a way, no, because ours is growing out of something we've already done. So we sort of started with tools and infrastructure, education and outreach that was already in place. And now we're sort of trying to figure out what to do with it in terms of having those, and now sort of doing the environmental scan and policy formation to see where we want to go. So it is sort of, yes, ass backwards, as it were.
Nancy, I see you're back in the meeting space, and I'm just going to ask you all for a moment of patience and see if we can't get Nancy to test her microphone. I'm going to leave you as a participant. I am seeing a mic icon next to your name now, whereas before I was not. Okay, we'll keep working on that, Nancy. I do apologize. Nancy, is that you? I think we might have heard you. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ina Cooper. And in the meantime, you can keep the conversation going in the chat window. And Ina, whenever you're ready, you can start the next discussion.
Okay. Thank you. So this part of the presentation focuses on repositories sort of from a broader perspective, and we wanted, obviously, there's a lot of conversation about institutional repositories, but we wanted to set in a broader context that there are different kinds of repositories, and it's not a question of everyone needs a repository and we should start doing it right now, right? But what are the options of storing digital content, delivering digital content, and organizing it? So defining a repository from a broader perspective, it's a set of applications and services that organize and deliver digital content, right? And depending on the focus, it could be an institutional repository when the focus is on supporting the members of an institution. It can be a disciplinary repository when the focus is on certain subject areas or disciplines. Some repositories emphasize the difference in storage options, and you can think of a cloud repository, and there can be a combination, obviously, between these. So an institution, for example, can build a cloud repository or maintain all the content on their own servers. The business model is another aspect that makes a difference in repositories, and some repositories emphasize open access, while others are more closed and rely on funders to support that. And as you see on the note, these terms and definitions, they're simple, but they're still in flux, and there's a lot of overlap between those. And on the next slide, you see the examples of different kinds of repositories, so you may be familiar with some of them or with all of them. So Merit and Deep Blue, for example, are examples of institutional repositories at the University of California and at the University of Michigan. DuraCloud is an example of a cloud repository that provides different options of how to store and preserve content. Figshare is the most common kind of business-oriented. Everyone can deposit their content there, but also has an institutional option as well. PubMed can be considered a disciplinary repository, but also a funder-supported repository, because some of part of it is supported by funders. So like I said, these are different examples of what a repository can be, and when choosing an option, it's useful to think about these various aspects of how to organize and deliver your content. So the question that universities, right, and educational institutions are grappling with, whether every one of us need to create an institutional repositories. And it obviously depends on many factors. So some people would advocate that yes, every institution has to have its own content and support members of this institution. Others would say, well, we don't have enough resources, so we may partner with others, or we may use other options that might be cheaper depending on the size and our constituency. So we would like to focus on these questions. And they're not the only questions that you might want to consider, but they are kind of the main questions that need to be addressed. So whether you need an institutional repository or not depends on what types of materials you collect, right? What is your constituency and who will use it, and then how the deposit actually happens, and there are different options, and I will talk about that. Then how much it costs, obviously a very important question, but also what kind of services you would like to provide. And each of these questions can be subdivided. Since we're providing sort of an overview, we will go over kind of the top tier of issues, and then we can get into details or discuss particular issues if they're of interest to any of you. So what kind of materials you collect? And institutions may not only collect different kinds of materials, but they also may emphasize support for different kinds of materials. And you may want to think about all of these, or you may want to think about some of those and emphasize digitization and organization and delivery of particular ones. So published materials, obviously in academia, publications like journal articles and other types of publications is one of the materials. Theses and dissertations, preprints or manuscripts, also what is called gray literature, working papers and technical reports. Data sets is another big component that even if you're not focusing on providing support for all other materials, this might be of interest, and this is of particular interest to all of us here. But also in educational institutions, there are other materials like course materials, right? There are maps and images, time-based media like audio and video, which has its own challenges of providing support for, but also software, which kind of goes along with data sets and publications more and more, as there are a lot of conversations about what does it mean to preserve and provide access to research objects, and can we treat them separately, and is it important to treat them separately, or do they go together as research gets more and more computational? Another question, your users or your constituency, and again, there are some obvious categories. There are students, there are faculty, and they produce certain kinds of materials that need support. Staff may also have their own materials. If the institution supports a lot of collaborative projects or collaborative activity, there also might be other types of users like affiliated faculty or guests. So for example, at IU, we have several collaborative projects that we're trying to think about how to support, and it turns out that IU's policy is, for now, to accept only items from our own faculty and students, and that then people who are collaborators from outside of IU, they're not eligible for depositing their materials into our institutional repository. So this is something, again, to consider in designing a repository or deciding whether you want to support it or not. how the deposit happens. There is some echo in the background. Okay. How the
Just a second, Ina, and mute your microphone. I apologize. Using your microphone, go ahead and put it on mute, and we'll continue. Okay, go ahead, Ina. I apologize for the interruption.
All right. So how the deposit happens, and there are different factors to consider here as well. One of them is whether the deposit happens with or without assistance, and there are different types of assistance that library professionals can provide to their users. So for example, there might be a need for technical assistance, right? If people don't know how to actually upload materials, that's one type of assistance. And more the software that supports institutional repositories, it gets more and more user-friendly. It used to be not that user-friendly, so it gets more user-friendly, so then the assistance may be sort of minimized. But still, it's always important to keep in mind that this is something that inevitably will be happening. The other type of assistance is curatorial assistance, and that's not only to upload the documents, but is there anything that needs to be done to prepare materials, provide necessary metadata, or organize it in a certain way, because it also depends on how the repository is organized, and then the policies that guide the deposit of materials in these. And that's where the professional help sometimes is necessary to assist with, especially with proper preservation, because it's not just storage, obviously, but it's also different actions that need to be taken in order to preserve materials long term. The deposit can happen before or after publication, and that's sort of one of the orientations of where institutional repository may or may not support preprint only, or also sort of working with publishers and having policies in place that guide the deposit, the supporting materials for publications, or the deposit after publications, because it will depend on user agreements and different kinds of things. The third way, which sort of complicates how a repository works and may require more technical expertise or more sophisticated software, is that especially if it's some sort of partnership where a repository is not to support the one institution, then the materials can arrive not through upload, but through harvesting from other resources. And there are a lot of conversations about interoperability and connecting different repositories to each other to serve a region, or to sort of provide a window into certain materials in the discipline. So that's where it might be important, and that's why it's important to consider as one of the aspects of how deposit happens. So then the cost is, of course, a big and important issue, and there are different approaches to modeling cost, and we have some links. They're not visible here, but we can share them later on modeling cost and trying to figure out. And it's a very challenging issue, and obviously it depends on many factors, and building a repository involves not only just providing software, so number 4 is hardware, software cost, right? But it's also building or estimating the cost of acquisition, the cost of ingest and migration, ongoing curation, because the curation happens at ingest, but if it's a long-term preservation, then some actions would have to be taken afterwards. Access and retrieval, depending on how the repository is structured, it could be some statistics and analytics built into it, or it could be a simple download kind of thing. And there are different options to work with that. And many of these factors that influence cost, they depend on various types of expertise, definitely. And then the disposal and licensing is how the materials are stored, who can access them, but also whether decisions are made of how to dispose of them or whether to store them indefinitely. And that adds to storage costs, that adds to maintenance costs, and these kinds of things. One of the exercises that I did along with my colleagues by request from NSF, where they considered sort of building and supporting their own repository of materials, we tried to estimate how much would it cost to build a repository that would store papers or publications in form of a journal article and data sets. So by looking at different models, and it's really hard to find an actual number of how much it costs for certain institutions to build such a repository, and the estimates vary, and different models include different kinds of factors, but we were asked to provide sort of a number, just a number, and that's what we arrived at. You see it on the slide. So about $3 to $5 per gigabyte, and we estimated that the cost will decrease if it starts at 5 because there's a capital investment and sort of larger investment, but then it will decrease over time, and it may be $3 per gigabyte. But the most expensive thing is probably curation and the effort that you take to maintain the materials up to date, make sure that they can be retrieved, they can be accessed, and that they can be used over time. So now I'm going to turn it over to Vesela, who will be, yes, and as Rita posed in the chat, are there any questions at this point?
Okay, so I guess I'll just advance the slides. This is Vesela. As Ina said, the costs depend on what you offer to go with the repository, and those costs are based on the services that you offer. Essentially, the question is what will be the difference between a repository and simply a storage space? So one of the most useful services is to provide persistent identifiers, DOIs or ARCs, for the different products that are being deposited. And there are, so you can probably buy those in bulk. I know that that's what UCOA does, and allow researchers at your institutions to connect their works to the DOIs. There are options for researcher IDs, which are free, for example, ORCID, so that way you'll solve the author disambiguation problem. If you're handling any materials that have been previously published, I'm sure you're aware of the embargo and the copyright agreements. You probably have to help your faculty to negotiate the license agreements before they publish. Then another problem to solve is how many copies are you going to keep and where those copies are going to be. If you collaborate with other institutions, that might be a fairly easy problem to solve. The curation and the preservation are really the most, as Ina said, the most costly, but also the most valuable aspect of a repository. So let's say the easiest way to ingest materials is to have an online form. But it might very often happen that researchers will not fill out the whole form. So it will be very helpful to actually have a librarian to meet up with the researchers and talk to them about what it is that they are depositing. and also determine if all the files are in the appropriate format. So the more the researchers have to do to deposit something into the repository, the less likely they are to do it. So there needs to be some sort of a balance between how much work the library will do and how much work the researchers will do. One of the things that I would recommend is if you decide to go for to use a form, to make sure that in your usability testing you invite many faculty from different departments to test it out, or at least graduate students, because a lot of the terminology and the metadata that libraries use is very unfamiliar and feels odd to a researcher. So, for example, a creator is a very strange term for any scientist to use in relation to their data or to their work. So I strongly recommend collaborating with your faculty, because what you want is something that they'll use, so they have to be comfortable in using it. In conversations with archivists at UCLA, she has said multiple times that the digital files that are deposited and just stored without format migration are going to be unreadable in 5 to 10 years. So that is really a big issue to consider. If you are collecting theses or publications, you can convert them to PDF-A files, and this is probably going to be okay. But if you are going into dataset collection, this is really a problem that needs to be addressed. A possibility, if you don't have the staff to do the format migration over time, it would be important to point that out in the description of the repository. And then the preservation is really one side of the repository. The other side is helping discovery and making the work more accessible for the rest of the world. And here is where you need to develop some way of presenting the works. So it might be search and discovery, a simple search algorithm that would work on keywords. If you're having videos, maybe you incorporate streaming, and if you have data, you might want to incorporate an analytics module. These are really more and more advanced services, and probably what you want to start with is the search and discovery application, and then simply allow yourself the possibility to build on that and allow streaming or analytics in the future. So other things to consider are essentially, well, is it possible that is your software easy to use? Is it user-friendly? As we have discovered with Apple, it doesn't matter if you have the best product. It matters that you have the most intuitive product. So don't expect researchers and scholars to spend a lot of time figuring out how to use a particular repository unless they really, really need to. The other thing to consider is how the repository relates to the policy at your institution, and whether it's how are you going to reach out to faculty and how you're going to recruit them. Ideally, you would know that the faculty wants the repository, and you would know why the faculty wants it. So that's the ideal case scenario. A lot of times outreach is necessary before and after the repository has been established. And once you decide on what you're going to collect, I think it's important to consider how whether there is redundancy with existing repositories. So if there is a national repository that already collects the same kind of works, are you investing money in something that already exists and has been created and improved over time? And the other side of this is what exists out there and where are the gaps and how your IR can fill in the gaps and not compete with national repositories. And perhaps you can establish collaborations with other institutions. So you only have a centralized repository, and that will be more cost efficient, because if you're filling in specific gaps, you may not have enough material for an IR just at your institution. But if you have maybe 5 institutions get together, then you can probably collect enough materials to demonstrate usage. You probably want your repository to be searchable for other means, and that is something to consider in designing your IR. And then finally, there are data that should not be placed in a repository unless it has several layers of protection. So, for example, HIPAA data, and that should be built into the description and the license agreement of the repository itself. So there was a question previously how to know what repositories are available out there. So there are a couple of there are 2 slides that are coming up. That essentially contain links in which you can check for more information on what is available. And the first 3, Re3 data and DataBib and DataCite, are merging together in 2015. So that's really good news. There's also going to be one place to check for those. There are also centralized search engines and groups and focus groups, locations where you can find out more for particular repositories. So these slides are going to be available to you, and these links are for your convenience to reference them. I'm going to point out that as a scientist, what I've been observing in the last 5 years is the NCBI databases just seem to be increasing exponentially, and it's very hard to keep track of what is what. So having courses on what is available and when to use it is a quite helpful tool there. So at this point, I would like to start a discussion within our either chat window or if you activate your microphones. But I would like to hear from institutions that already have an institutional repository about how they've been designed, what you're using, what is your model. And then we would like to hear from the institutions that don't have an IR what their thoughts are in terms of whether they want to have one and why do they want to have one. So if we can start with the institutions that have already established a repository.
This is Sarah Williams. I don't know if people can hear me. I can just respond
Sarah?
rather than text. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm from University of Illinois, and I can share a little bit about what we've done with we do have an institutional repository. I'm not the person in who's the coordinator of it, so I don't know some of the infrastructure details to it. But our institutional repository was set up mainly originally for publications, right? Theses and dissertations, preprints, other sorts of publications that were coming out of the university. But in recent years, we have started accepting data sets in the repository. Initially, many of those were data sets that were supporting theses and dissertations, but we have started getting requests from researchers on campus who want to find a place to preserve and make available data that supports journal articles that they're publishing. We just had that question come up again this week. Some people in our Institute for Genomic Biology want to deposit about a little over 4 gig of data that supports an article that they're planning to publish in PLOS. So, I think as far as how things are deposited, I think it's kind of a mix of some people doing it on their own, but at least as far as the data sets go, it's been somewhat of a mediated process where we work with the researcher to make sure that we get the information, the metadata that we need to complete that record in our institutional repository. Anyways, that's just a little bit about what we've done at Illinois so far.
So actually,
anybody else want to take the mic?
I'll go ahead.
I just want to interject. This is Vesela. So actually, PLOS recently instituted a policy for requiring data sets to be made available for all publications. And if you have checked the prices on Dryad, they're pretty expensive. So there might be an increased need for data set deposits. Just heads up. And yeah, please go ahead with the report.
Hi, this is Chris, Jim, and Cindy from the University of Arizona. We have a campus repository, and most of what's in there are publications, reports. We have theses and dissertations. And originally, when it was set up, we set up a service model where faculty or staff would do their own depositing. What we found is that that doesn't really happen very often, so we usually do the depositing ourselves. But now we're beginning to work with more and more faculty that are interested in making their data available in the repository. There is a limitation on file size, but more and more we're getting those requests, especially as I've been out on campus working related to data management, data curation, that we've been getting more requests for that.
We have sorry, this is Kathleen from Rochester. And our institutional repository sounds pretty similar to the other two that have been described, that it was kind of originally conceived for publications, but we do have a little bit of data in there currently. One of the things that we're looking at doing, since there hasn't been, researchers knocking down the doors to get to the institutional repository necessarily, we're looking at trying to kind of bring the repository to where the data is. By partnering with our high-performance computing center. So, they're producing a ton of data. They've got the data sitting on their servers, and so we're looking at partnering with them to kind of bring up a data-specific repository within Rochester, possibly using the Data Conservancy software. So, we're kind of still in the discussion stages of that, and I'm hoping that it'll move forward this summer, but, it is one thing that we're kind of thinking about. For handling data specifically.
Thank you, Kathleen. Anybody else want to respond to Vesela's discussion points?
Hey, this is Peter at Colgate, and just a couple. I think our model is a little different in a couple of ways. One of which, as I mentioned in a chat comment, there's a big emphasis on branding the institution. That this was seen as something we should have in order to sort of demonstrate, the quality of Colgate. There's also We also don't have the resources to do this ourselves, so we're using a cloud-based solution. We have a digital commons through BE Press. And I don't know if the other people who've talked so far, if this is stuff they're doing in-house or if they're going outside and contracting for someone else to do it for them. And we're also mainly focused, not surprisingly, on undergraduate material. We have a showcase of undergraduate work. And we've gotten a mandate, in fact, from the administration to, in the very near future, start putting all senior theses in the repository, though there's a little concern about that because maybe not every single undergraduate thesis should be shown to the public. But that's where we are.
Hi, this is Maya from University of Manitoba. We use a DSpace for our institutional repository, and we mainly collect theses and dissertations, and I started collecting some preprints of research publications. And I believe there are some small data sets, but not that many right now, and mostly in spreadsheets like Excel kind of things. And not the current version of DSpace we have, but I was told that the next version of DSpace would have a data embargo, not data, but the embargo feature, so we could place some restrictions on the items we have in institutional repository for a certain period of time. And we also added a new analytics feature, Plum Analytics, that would actually display some citation statistics from other sources like Mendeley and Web of Sciences.
To be some activity going on in the chat window, and Vesela, I'm going to turn it back over to you and to the participants for those institutions that don't have an IR.
So yeah, I would like, let's hear from those institutions who don't have an IR. What about the motivation to get one? Are you thinking about one, and have you considered other options, and how do those other options fit with your goals? I see University of Toronto is typing in the chat window. Toronto, do you know what you would like to collect in your IR?
While we're watching the chat window, if anybody else that has a mic that's working wants to chime in, please feel free. And again, continue to use that chat window for ongoing discussion or questions.
I'm curious, for those of you who are collecting theses, do you have an embargo period for those, especially graduate theses? Has the question come up? And I see Toronto has answered that they collect research output. So it's a so they're considering a repository that will collect not only publications but also data. Okay, so it looks like embargoes are fairly important for dissertations. Okay, and then a final question. I would like to hear if, actually, from both the institutions who have IRs and for those who are considering, have you considered the possibility of combining efforts with other institutions who either share the same mission with you or who are close to you geographically? If you have and you have rejected this idea, why so? And if you haven't, does this seem like an option that you would like to consider?
This is Sarah Williams from University of Illinois again. I can share a little bit about that. We already have our institutional repository, which is just, to serve Illinois, and we maintain that. But we're also looking towards perhaps getting a repository geared more towards data, research data, and I think with that we have had some conversations with other institutions in the Big Ten, or the CIC, which is our kind of our consortium. I haven't been involved in any of those conversations. Those are happening at a higher level than I have, but I think that's something we're considering. It's just a matter of working through issues and whether all the groups' goals and would align with each other. But it's something we've at least talked a little bit about here at Illinois for a data repository.
Hi, this is Chris again from Arizona, and there's a project going on called Live Data, where the three major universities in Arizona are looking into having not necessarily one data repository, but more of a discovery layer, so that people would just go to one place to search for data that's been produced by faculty at one of the three universities.
Okay, so all of these answers sound very interesting, and I'm sure that there is a lot of thought that this discussion has generated. In interest of time, I'm going to turn the mic over to Nancy. Nancy, can you? I don't know, Rita, can you take over? Or?
Unfortunately, Nancy and I and Louisa have been working on her audio issues since about 10:30 this morning. We've tried several times. We got it to work once, and we're still working on it, and it does not look like we're going to be able to hear Nancy today. Nancy, just for the sake of trying, can you try your mic one more time? I do see the mic icon. I don't know if you still have your headphones set up. If not, that's fine. What we'll do for the group is I'll schedule a time with Nancy, and we will record her section of the webinar, and then we'll send that link out to you. I have been communicating with Nancy through email during the webinar, and she asked me to share this information with you. There is a link to a web version of the track tool that you all can see but not edit. And the zip file is downloadable from Artifactual. It looks like I might have messed that link up. Let me try that again. Hold on just a second. There you go. And Nancy says try this at home if you like. And we do have a little time. I'll just slowly go through the slides so you can see what Nancy had prepared for us. If you have any questions for Nancy, she is going to stay on the chat through the remainder of the session, but she's not going to try to present her portion through the chat window. And again, we do apologize. It's the beauty of technology. So I'll slowly advance the slides, and you can see some of the things that Nancy has put together for us today. In the meantime, while you're waiting for me to get through these, if you have any questions for Nancy or any questions in general, please feel free to either speak up on your microphone or put them in the chat window. And it looks like Nancy is typing in the chat window. And Nancy, we do look forward to having you record a session so that we can share with the rest of the group. So this would have been the end of Nancy's presentation, and we're just going to pause a few minutes. Are there any other questions? Anything you'd like to bring up related to today's topics? Again, we do apologize for the audio difficulties that Nancy's having. If so, feel free to use the chat window or turn on your mic and use that. Well, I'm not hearing anyone, and I'm not seeing any chat activity, so we'll wrap it up early. And I just want to encourage all of you in the group to keep talking. Let's keep these conversations going, and use that Clear Connect space as a discussion space or a space to share events, ideas, anything that you'd like to post in there. And I wanted to remind you all of the Idea Scale community that we have, where you can post your suggestions for webinar content or other types of delivery, subjects you'd like more information on, that kind of thing. So if you haven't visited that yet or haven't done so recently, there has been some activity, so you might want to take another look. I also wanted to raise the idea of setting up a regularly scheduled yet informal meeting space in Adobe Connect. We won't use audio since it's quite troublesome. We do this for our postdoctoral fellows. We call it office hours. They're just informal chat sessions where you all can get together. They're not recorded. Other options are setting up a Google Hangout, that kind of thing. So if that's something that you all think you'd like to start doing on a regular basis, we're more than happy to facilitate that. So just let us know. And if you have any other ideas or suggestions about collaborating and keeping the conversation going, please feel free to post in Clear Connect or send us an email. I did want to take a few minutes and turn the mic over to Mayu. She wanted to speak to the rest of the group about her proposal for the DLF forum. So Mayu, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rita. So I'd just like to repeat the call for panel participations for DLF 2014. That's the forum happening right after our in-person meeting in Atlanta, Georgia in October. I actually posted the proposal draft to our peer group online forum as well. Basically, an opportunity for us to share our peer group experience with institutions outside this group. And I've been working on a proposal with Ina and Kendall, two of our Clear DLF fellows. So far, Kathleen from the University of Rochester responded, and thank you so much, Kathleen. And I'm hoping to see, hopefully, one more library to join that panel. So we hope to have some mini presentations and then have a panel discussion afterwards. That's kind of a rough idea for the proposal. And we also hope to cover both the theory and the practice of building the community of practice in the research data services context. And if you have any questions about this proposal or interested in joining that panel, please respond to me either by email or through the peer group online forum. Thank you.
We at Clear DLF are really excited about this proposal, and it's a great idea, and hopefully somebody else will join your efforts there. We look forward to seeing that at the forum. Okay, at this point, we've just got a few housekeeping things to go over. The next webinar is scheduled for the 16th of July from 1 to 2:30 p.m. again, Eastern Standard Time, and the topic currently for the next webinar is data management needs. Now, we're not, these topics are not set in stone. We really wanted them to become participant driven. So if you have other ideas that you'd like to see addressed in the next webinar, please let us know. Ina did post a tentative schedule for the remaining webinars in the Clear Connect space, so you may want to go back and take a look at that. And then again, in order to help keep you all engaged with one another during webinars, we will be coming up with some kind of group activity similar to the last one that you did. So be on the lookout for that. You all should have gotten a notification of a digital badge for being a part of the eResearch Peer Network and Mentoring Group. And that would have come to you from BASNO, B-A-S-N-O, and Louisa has been working on that. So if you have any questions about that, just let us know, but you should all now have a digital badge. If you didn't get one, let us know. And we do also have a Twitter hashtag now, eResearch Network. There's been a little bit of tweeting going on today during the session. Feel free to use it to talk about your experience in the group, and also during the webinars if you feel like sharing. Lastly, there's a quick poll I'd like to get you all to take a minute to participate in. I'm actually kind of hesitant to pull it out and ask you to take it today given the audio issues that we've had, but that aside, I will ask you to just take a few minutes and participate in this brief poll. Let me pull that up. And it's basically asking you to rate your satisfaction with the peer network mentoring group so far. And again, hopefully today's audio issues won't have too much of an impact. It does happen in Adobe Connect. It's very fickle with audio, but we do appreciate your patience and understanding. So I'll leave this poll up just for a few more minutes. We'll be doing a more formal survey, of course, at the end of the in-person event, and again, probably during the course of the next several webinars. So we just want to make sure we have a good idea of what we need to change, what we can do better, what you'd like to see as a result of being a part of this group. So aside from this simple poll, again, feel free to email us, post in Clear Connect, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Okay, so 6 of you have participated in the poll, and give it another minute, and then I'm just going to go ahead and close that out. Okay, so at this time, that's all we have for you today. I'm going to leave the chat window open if anybody wants to continue the conversation. The meeting room will be open for at least another 15 minutes. Again, apologies for our audio difficulties with Nancy, but we will get that content to you. And as I mentioned earlier, the recording from today's session will be made available, as well as the slides and the chat text. I want to thank everybody for an excellent overview of data repositories, and thank you, Nancy, for joining us despite the fact that you couldn't talk to us. And thanks to all of you group members for your participation in the group activity and for joining us today, and thank you to our postdoctoral fellows. So this concludes today's webinar, and on behalf of CLIR and DLF, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.